Hi, Social Work 110. So this will be the first formal lecture in this class that we have, I guess, another 13 or 14 modules in. There might be a couple videos that I do throughout it, but there's going to be certain ones that are going to be more of lecture and there'll be questions with them. So just so that you understand, I'm going to give you the basic lecture that I would be giving in class. It'll be a little bit different because if we were in an in-person class, I would be asking questions and you'd be contributing and then we'd go on to the next topic. So this way I'm going to have to kind of talk to you and pretend you're answering me. When the lecture's done, there will be a list of questions, some of which will be kind of repetitive of the class just to make sure that you heard things. Just so you know, you should be able to stop and start this if you need to, and I will keep the questions in order of the lecture so there's no need to go back and forth. You could watch 5 minutes and then see if that question was asked or anything. My goal is for you to be able to listen and take things in and just confirm that you were actually here for the class. I'm not trying to, test anybody from this or anything. But I do have to prove that people took the class, and that's how I'm going to do it. So I also am going to have to look at my notes. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to just do this off the top of my head, memorized, but I can't. So we are going to do it a little bit that way. I want to tell you ahead of time, there's a dog next to me, another one under my feet. They may bark at some point, but you'll get to know them through this class. So I guess what I'd like to start off with is for us to be able to talk about utopia. I'm going to assume you know what utopia is. That's like the perfect society. So throwing out to me some examples of what utopia is. What would be a perfect society? I'll probably ask you this in the questions so you can throw a couple in here. But let's assume that you're saying them to me right now. I'm just going to give you a break to think of a couple utopian society things. So there'd be no poverty, right? There'd be no pollution. There'd be no mental illness. There wouldn't be crime. What else wouldn't there be? There would be no poverty. There would be no racism. So all of these things go to prove one thing. If you're in this class because you want to be a social worker, you have job security because we are probably never going to have utopia. So as long as there are problems, human problems like poverty and racism, and all the ones I just mentioned, then we are going to need social workers. That's what we do. I'm hoping we can work ourselves out of a job, but I'm just thinking that that's probably not likely to happen. Social workers do, my mother used to say when something broke in the house, she would say, hey, call the man so he can fix that. Social workers are that man. We're the thing that fixes broken systems. And we help broken people or broken families to get themselves back on track again. So we're pretty important that way. And like I said, you're going to have job security. I'm going to just read you the exact definition of a social worker. Helping people find solutions to human problems in an always changing society. Promoting human well-being by advocating for social change, intervening with people at the point where the human psychology meets with the physical environment and where they intersect. So what does that mean? That means that we are unique as a profession because we do deal one-on-one with people. Some of you are going to end up becoming therapists as social workers. Some of you will do some counseling with people, maybe not just therapy. Some of you are going to go and have to do interventions with families or with people who are suffering with addictions or behavior problems. But the reality is unique to social workers. We take that unique one-person psychology and we also realize that the environment is having an effect. When talking to someone, we understand that if sexism, racism, poverty, mental illness, all of those things are impacting the exact thing that your client came into you for. So you can't just look at a person by themselves in their bubble. You have to take in their environment. That's why we are unique people. That's why we are a unique profession. Just so you know, social workers, one of the things I want to say too is that a psychologist is going to go out there and treat some mental illness with people. A lawyer is going to fight against injustice for their client. A nurse is going to heal with techniques and the use of medicine. And a cop negotiates, calm, and deals with the ugly part of society. But a social worker does all of that. They are fighting for justice for their clients at the same time as they are helping, at the same time as they are connecting them to services that are out there. At the same time, they're helping everyone, including that client, to deal with the ugly environment the world can be sometime. So that you know, social workers have a variety of degrees. The first is an associate's degree. Associates of arts or or science and social work. The next is a BSW, a bachelor's of social work degree, and that is eligible to have a license today. I do not have a bachelor's of social work. I have a criminal justice bachelor's and a sociology bachelor's, but I went and got my master's in social work. Because I didn't have a BSW, I had to go to grad school for an extra half a year. So if you're thinking of the MSW, get the BSW. It will be a quicker procedure. So BSW, Bachelor's of Social Work, master's degree is next, Master's of Social Work. Then you'll take a test and you'll get your license. So you'll be a licensed social worker. My daughter actually is a master's in social work and hasn't taken her license yet. She's about to take that test. And then you'll do a certain amount of hours. I think it's 3,000 hours of clinical work, at which point you can take another test and become a licensed clinical social worker, an LCSW. And finally, there are some people that go on and get their doctorate, their DSW in social work. A lot of those people go on to teach in college and to be professors and everything. So the next thing, I'm going to try this again to ask you a question that I'm wishing that you could answer me right in person. But what are some personal problems you think people come to a social worker for? What do you think happens that people come and might call a social worker? Well, they may have a parent who's having some problems with dementia, right? And they may need a social worker. They may come because they are feeling depressed and need a social worker. They may come because they were referred to a social worker because somebody called children and youth on them and said that they were neglectful of their children. They may have a child with a learning disability. So those would all be kind of personal reasons why they might engage with a social worker. So now, list some public problems that are just out in our society, right? Racism, poverty, sexism, ableism, against people with disabilities, global warming. All of those things are public problems that are also affecting those people who have the primary problem they came to the social worker with. Some social workers are just going to deal with that personal problem that the person came with. Others will do what we call is macro social work, and they will be trying to change the greater system, trying to eradicate racism and sexism and global warming. And they'll do that kind of advocacy all the time. Most social workers do a little bit of both. I'm going to try to make sure, if I could write this down on a board, I would right now. So here are 4 things. I'm going to try to probably ask you this when we're done. So you might want to write this down. There are 4 important points of social work. Point number 1 is that we assess people and help them find their own strengths and their own skills. That's one of the things we do. We assess for strength and skills. The second thing we do is we work to link people with the resources they need while we advocate for policy changes so that people will be able to cope better. The third thing is we make sure that the systems are fair to all people, that service delivery is good, and that the system is fair to everyone. And the final thing we do is we advocate for greater changes in the government or within institutions. We call that social justice. So those are 4 of the main things. And I just want to give you an example. Let's say that we have a case of an African-American woman, because we want to make sure we're always taking into account all the factors that are impacting somebody. This African-American woman is 33 years old. She lives with her sister. She works at Walmart. She's been diagnosed with bipolar, and she does not have a driver's license. So I'm asking you to kind of answer me. What are her personal problems? So her personal problems are she's got a mental health disorder that she's dealing with, right? She doesn't have a driver's license, so that's kind of a problem. She's working at Walmart, so she's not making a ton of money, and she is living with her sister. So those are some problems. Not that that's a problem to live with your sister, but she's not independent on her own or anything. So what are now the societal problems that would be affecting her? Unreliable public transportation could be one. She's African American. She may experience some forms of racism. She's working at Walmart, and so she may be dealing with classism issues. She may be not making enough money to be able to make ends meet, so that she may need to have some support like food stamps, things like that, to make things easier. So you see how things intersect. Let's do another one. Let's say we have a woman who lives with her husband. It appears the husband could be an alcoholic. The woman has now been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She and her husband, who's struggling with alcoholism, live in a 3-story row home in the city. Both she and her husband work at a local potato chip factory. So, what are the personal issues she's dealing with? On one hand, she is dealing with the fact that her husband may have a drinking problem. She's also been diagnosed with a disease that is going to be difficult for her to deal with, probably for the rest of her life. She is living in a house that has 3 floors, and she works in a factory, and she has a disease that could be disabling to her. So she's got all of those things going on. Meanwhile, what are some societal things that she might be facing? One thing is that society does not look real kindly towards people who are disabled. So she's got some ableism, as they say, out there that she's going to have to deal with. She and her husband working in a potato chip factory, so they may not be making a ton of money. There might not be great health insurance, so there could be some fears that way. So she's got those things going on. And so if she came to you as a social worker, you'd be dealing with the impact of all of that, right? I'm going to read you another case here just to bring this point home. Okay. I'm going to have to look down and read for a minute. So, every day Katrina would wake up. She'd hit the alarm delay 3 or 4 times, exhausted. Sometimes when the dread and exhaustion was just too much, she just gave up and slept in. Usually she would wake up when her son Kenny would crawl into her bed, hungry for breakfast. Sometimes this would be late enough that she would end up too late to take him to school. It wouldn't be an option. He had to use public transportation. On a good day, when she could get some of the Wi-Fi that she got from the corner store or her neighbor, she would be able to know what the ozone alert was. If it was bad, she would know that Kenneth needed to take his inhaler to school because his asthma was really difficult on those days. Money was always an issue, and work was never easy. She had to have jobs that allowed some sick time because Kenneth would get sick with his asthma. And the cost of a sitter was a lot, so she had to take advantage of family, her mother and her sister, which really meant she could only take jobs that were on the weekends. So Katrina was taking advantage of that option, and she was working at the local dollar store Saturdays and Sundays. She got some child support from Kenneth's father, but it wasn't reliable, and it required her to come to listen to him and to him to come in and give her a lot of his life story along the way when he was going to drop off the money. He'd been a nice young man when they met, but he'd become abusive and used a lot of alcohol once they were married. And she has a protection from abuse order. She's violating it every time she lets him in the house to get that money to help her and Kenneth make ends meet. So that's kind of putting her in a difficult situation. So I guess what I want to ask you is to think about, what are Katrina's personal issues? What are Kenneth, her son's, personal issues? And what are some societal issues that are at play here that could impact her? So thinking about that for a minute with Katrina, I mean, she definitely has financial issues. She has a certain amount of probably fear with that protection from abuse order, that if they find out that he is in her house, then it could be taken away. She struggles with depression. That's one of the reasons she's having trouble getting out of bed. She's going to struggle even more if they end up charging her with helping her son to be truant from school. So what are Kenneth's issues? He's not always making it to school. He has asthma. Did Kenneth see the domestic violence? Does he know about his father's issues? Does his dad spend any time with him? Does he worry about his mother's depression? So there's those issues. And then let's talk about the societal issues, okay? In this particular case, there's no car, so they're relying on transportation for everything. Getting to school, get to work, getting food, getting to the mom's house or the sister's house for daycare. She's making probably minimum wage, which isn't enough to make ends meet. She has a son that requires medication. The dollar store does not provide medical benefits or anything, so she may be connected with CHIP, but she still worries about how much that inhaler is going to cost. And she can't afford daycare at all. So you can see where we have problems that are going to impact her because society, the cost of medication and the lack of public transportation, as well as her own personal issues with depression and Kenneth's asthma. So this is kind of what social workers do. They help people to identify what their problem is. They try to find resources for those clients to make their needs a little easier to deal with. And then when they start seeing a problem arising, maybe more than one person, they know that there's a system problem. And at that point, social workers are unique because they start trying to change the system to make things different. Next thing I wanted to talk about generally was if you're going to be a social worker, there's probably, and I'll probably ask you a question about this after the lecture, but 9 different kind of fields that you can get into. Okay, so the first one has to do with medical. So maybe in these questions, I'll probably be asking you, can you think of some medical reasons people would need a social worker? I can tell you one right off the top of my head, and that would be somebody who had a cancer diagnosis might need a social worker both for the emotional support of having either individual sessions or group to deal with the grief and the reality of their diagnosis. But they might also need a social worker from the very beginning to set up appointments for chemotherapy, to have some services delivered to their home if they were to ever decide that they needed palliative care. So that's where the social worker would come in there as well. But I'm going to ask you for some other things that social workers might do. I'm hoping, like if you were here right now, we would just yell them out. So I'm hoping you can think of a couple other medical reasons. Criminal justice is another area where social workers work. They may become probation officers for adults or probation officers for juveniles. They may be counselors in a jail. We have a lot of social workers in our jail, primarily doing drug and alcohol intervention and treatment. They also will work as victims counselors, helping people who've been victims of crimes, helping women and men who are trying to get protection from abuse orders or to get in or out of an abusive relationship. And some social workers end up being sort of working with police. We have a new program that I'm happy to say I was able to start in 2020, which are called co-responders. You may have heard of them. There's 39 police departments in Bucks County, and I think we are in 33 of those police departments now. So it's a social worker assigned to the police department who goes out on calls when there's a situation of mental illness, homelessness, a child that's in danger, domestic violence, an aging parent. Sometimes we have people who are senior citizens who are calling the police constantly. And so with the co-responder, they've been able to go in there and help that person to get involved in some things in the community and deliver some services at home so they don't need to call the police all the time. So that's a great area for social workers to go in who are interested in criminal justice. A lot of work in re-entry, helping people adjust as they get out of jail or prison, have to come back to the community and find work. Children and youth, and working with children and families. There's a lot of social work in that. The county has almost 200 social workers who work in children and youth, going out there and investigating incidents of neglect or abuse. As well as we have agencies that we work with who actually go into families' homes, or sometimes the families come into the office and they deliver family therapy. So there's lots of work to help children and families get better. Working also with children and families who are experiencing housing shortages. If they are facing a divorce, there are some social workers who work to help families in divorce decide how they are going to handle child custody issues. Sometimes judges will ask that a social worker be assigned to evaluate a family so he or she can make a recommendation on what the child care arrangements should be. Clearly, some social workers go into clinical and mental health. This could be first as a peer support specialist. We have peer support specialists in drug and alcohol as well as mental health. These are people who've, had experiences of their own in the mental health system or drug and alcohol system, and now they also go ahead and get a degree or a certain amount of coursework, and then they go out there and they work with people who are in the middle of a drug and alcohol or mental health problem. Intellectual disabilities. Lots of social workers are involved with that, is particularly with students who have autism or Asperger's, or in long-term care for people with disabilities and intellectual issues who are now adults and cannot live on their own. So social workers will also often get involved there. Aging, another big place where social workers work. The Area Agency on Aging, that's required in every county pretty much in the United States. And they go out and take a look and see if someone needs to be in a nursing home. They'll also go out and try to see if there are some services that can be delivered in that person's home so that they can stay in their home. They'll do investigations. If someone makes a call that a family or a friend might be financially exploiting someone who is aging. Social change is another area where social workers get involved. They may work for a state legislature. They may work for a congressman. They may work in my office. And what we do is try to make the changes in social policies as well as laws so that families and children and people with disabilities and mental health issues are able to get the help they need and are not having the impact of those outside systems all the time. Sometimes, besides working for an elected official, people in those social change areas might work for a peace coalition. They may work for the NAACP. Some get involved as a lobbyist for certain issues. And there's a lot of blending that occurs with all of this, right? So, you might be thinking that you're working with drug and alcohol issues, but you're actually involved with a client's entire family, and maybe there's a family member that has a mental health issue. So you're dealing with that absolute blending that does occur. I think one of the last things that I want to ask right now for today, before the next lecture, is this. I'm assuming that all of you know who the Kennedys are, and you probably all know who the Trumps are. So I'm wondering if someone in the Trump or the Kennedy family had a drug and alcohol problem, who would they call for help? How would they get treatment? How would they get help? So hopefully you're saying to yourself, well, they have money. They would hire a private therapist, a psychologist. They would hire some company to come and find a place where they could go and get treatment. Or they'd hire somebody from the Mayo Clinic to come to their home. For everybody else, except people on that level, they need a social worker. They need a social worker to help them figure out what they can do to try to solve what problem they're in. That Kennedy or Trump family versus a 33-year-old single mom who has a DUI, and as a result of the DUI, she's lost her job, and now her family is angry at her. She needs a social worker. She's going to have to start to rebuild her life. So I'm going to list some questions. I'm going to put them in the bottom of this lecture so that you can just hit reply and answer them. At least that's how I think would be the easiest way. I may change that later. I would like to say that if I've said anything here that you have a question about, or there's any questions that make you have a question, since we're not in class, you're going to have to email me. So email me and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay? Thanks. Talk to you soon. Bye.